News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. And joining us are Charlotte Dunker from The Times and The Sun's Jack Rosser. Hello, welcome to you both. Chat to you shortly. First of all, let's run through those back pages. Starting with The Guardian, they've got an exclusive with Chris Wokes, and they're also concentrating on the future of Alexander Isak as Eddie Howe orders him to stay away. Moving on to The Sun, Gorilla Blow is their main headline. We'll talk to Jack about his story on the back page. On to The Telegraph. Alexander Isak ordered to train alone. We'll speak about his future. To The Times, Sesko is their main headline, saying that he's going to choose United over Newcastle. Next to the Eye, very similar story there. Sesko picks Red Devils, but fee still not agreed. Has this deal got still some room to run? And to The Star, loaner. Two players they're talking about there. Jack Grealish, could he be heading on loan to Everton? We'll talk about the England man soon. Let's start with your paper, Jack, The Sun, and your story about Alexander Isak, ordered to train away from the club, excluded from the players' barbecue as well. Is this all getting a little bit personal?
It's you do feel sorry for Newcastle, almost as if their summer couldn't get any more farcical. They're now banning players from what's supposed to be a together team building, nice feeling thing back at the training ground. Their first day back after their tour of Asia, which obviously he wasn't on. It feels like this is only going one way now. It's felt like that for a long time, but things like this just really point it in the direction that he will be moving to Liverpool at some point, regardless of the stance that they didn't want to sell, regardless of where the fee ends up. It all feels like it's going one way, and you can understand why Eddie Howe's done it, I suppose, if he wants to get the squad together and everyone feeling happy and moving in the right direction ahead of the start of the Premier League season. Then Isak being there after everything that's happened is a bit of a distraction, but it is just another story to, for rival fans to poke fun at Newcastle. It has been, objectively, for anyone that's not a Newcastle fan, quite an entertaining summer from the outside, looking in, going for all of these targets and not quite getting there, and having this to and fro on Alexander Isak. So I think, especially for Eddie Howe, managers always like to have things settled before pre-season, ideally, if not before the start of the season. Obviously, the window rumbles on into the start of the Premier League season until the 1st of September. The feeling now is that there's so much noise around Isak every single day that he would really want it to be done, dusted, get him off, get him to Liverpool, and really start moving on, reinvesting that money and building what should be a really exciting season. Newcastle came into this summer off the back of being in the Champions League, winning a trophy, ending that massive drought, that 70-year drought last season, one of the greatest seasons they've had under Eddie Howe last year, and then all of it being pulled away. This should be a really exciting season for them to build, and this summer's just distracting from it, so he will want it over with sooner rather than later.
Yeah, the Alexander Isak story on the back of the Mirror, on the front of the Telegraph sports section as well. Charlotte, the Telegraph talk about this rift deepening between Isak and Newcastle. Just how difficult a position is Eddie Howe in at the moment?
I think, to be fair, he's set his stall out, hasn't he? He said he won't be training with the team until he starts displaying the behaviour that he wants, and that's fair enough. The players made it clear that he wants to leave. Eddie Howe's only going to want players that are in his squad that are fully invested with the project going forward. So it's this awkward standoff. We've seen it at clubs so many years, so many times over the transfer windows, and 9 times out of 10, it normally ends up with the player leaving because that's the best for both parties. Like Jack said, I think at this point, the best thing that could happen is that it gets resolved sooner rather than later. It sounds petty not inviting him to a players' barbecue, but Eddie Howe's working with the group now that he wants to work with going forward. Obviously, they still want to bring players in. It's unfortunate for them that they look like they're set to miss out on another target as well in Sesko. So they're going to want to build this mentality. If they don't bring anyone in, they need to build this mentality going and of strength going into this new season. They don't need people in and around the group who've made it clear that they don't want to be there. So I think Eddie Howe's dealt with it as best as he can. And at this moment in time, that's with Isak training or not training due to this minor injury, alone and separate from the group. So hopefully, for everyone's sake, including ours, so we don't have to keep talking about it every week, it is a deal that is done sooner rather than later.
It's such a huge deal, though, isn't it? And we heard our colleague Keith Downey speak earlier, Jack, over whether we could see Isak in a black and white Newcastle shirt at the beginning of the season. The season's, of course, not far away. Is that a realistic prospect, given where we are at the moment?
I really, really don't think so. I think Eddie Howe has made it quite clear, as Charlotte was saying, that whether he wants Isak to stay or not, you'd obviously want a player of that quality in your team. He needs him fully invested, training properly behind what they want to do at Newcastle. And, you know, the events of today, it just feels so far apart in terms of what that level needs to be to where he would be back in the team, back in the fold and starting a game. Charlotte mentioned he's had this knock all the way through, so it's been a bit bizarre. You know, we don't really know how severe that was, whether it was a problem or not, or whether it's all just been down to what's been going on around Liverpool, whether he's even ready for the start of the season, having had that not been part of their pre-season preparations, didn't play in Scotland, didn't play in Asia, went off to Spain to train with his old club. None of that sounds like ideal preparation for the start of a Premier League season, regardless of the quality of the player. So I'd be absolutely amazed if we saw him in a Newcastle shirt again.
Just going to The Guardian on this story, Charlotte, they talk about the standoff with Newcastle and Alexander Isak escalating. Newcastle have said, we understand, they want a replacement in if they're going to let Isak go. But might they have to shift that stance and let him leave, you know, clear the decks on this particular situation, then move on and try and sign a striker? Could we see that happen now?
At the moment, it seems a standoff for them to maybe get an extra 10, 20, 30 million out of Liverpool, because they know that Liverpool want the player. It's obvious that Isak wants to go there. He's not training. He's not going to be fit for the start of the season. What use is that going to be to Eddie Howe? Can this be resolved? And then you've got a player sitting there who's worth, as an asset, over £100 million, who doesn't want to be at the club. So in that sense, it would make sense to sell him. But then if you look how unfortunate they've been in this transfer window and the targets that they've already missed out on, if they sell him and they don't manage to bring anyone in, that is a big gap in the squad in terms of guaranteed goals. Look how many goals, I think it was 21 last season. You're losing 21 goals. And maybe if he doesn't end up going, that bridges can be rebuilt. It doesn't seem that way at the moment, but stranger things have happened in football. So I can understand why they are holding out, because I think they can get more money out of Liverpool, is clearly what they think, because otherwise they would have accepted that offer that Liverpool bid last week for him. So it just seems to be a waiting game. And maybe if Liverpool up their bid and the player is still adamant that he wants to go, then it's going to be an offer they can't refuse, taking over 110 million, because that's what the last bid was, for a player that clearly doesn't want to be there anymore and wants a new challenge. It seems like it would be daft to turn down that sum of money.
And in the meantime, Jack, of course, Eddie Howe has to get his plans in place for the new season. He's working on different deals, and possibly one player he might be interested in. Intriguing move, this, potentially. Aston Villa's John McGinn. What do you make of that?
It'd definitely be an interesting one. I don't think he particularly suits the profile in terms of age that Newcastle would want to be going for. I know they've had some concerns over Ollie Watkins regarding that, him being, 30 and towards the end of his career. But John McGinn, clearly an experienced player at Premier League level, robust, someone that's performed consistently in the Premier League and has had that taste of Europe in the Champions League last season. I think Aston Villa fans would be absolutely loath to see him go. I think there might be some other, maybe better options out there in terms of potential. As I mentioned, again, the age and getting more out of him. Aston Villa are going to want a fair whack to take John McGinn out of their side, I think. There are a few other places they could look. Obviously, they've still got Wissa going, slightly different profile, but maybe someone that's a slightly better fit for the way Newcastle play or want to play under Eddie Howe. But it may reach a point where they have to bid for anyone and see what they get. The way it's gone this summer, you reel off the players they've been in for. Just looking at the striker alone, they've looked at Liam Delap, João Pedro, Hugo Ekitike, Benjamin Sesko, and have either missed out or are going to miss out on all of them. So there's going to be a long list that Newcastle are working through, and it'd be no surprise if a player like John McGinn was on there. But it will take a lot to get him away from Aston Villa and Aston Villa fans, I think.
You mentioned Sesko there. Let's talk about him and move to the back of the eye. Sesko picks Red Devils, but fee still not agreed. There's been this tug of war between Manchester United and Newcastle. Charlotte over Sesko, leaning towards him now joining United, but fee still not agreed. This isn't going to trip up at the late stage, is it?
I mean, it's possible, but it's another one that seems unlikely given, like Isak, the player's been training alone. He's made it clear that he wants to leave. So I think it's a case of just negotiating the finer details in terms of how much money can Leipzig get out of Manchester United. They've currently actually bid less than Newcastle have, but the player has given his intention that he wants to join Manchester United. So it could be that they finally get a new number 9 in, which is obviously been a priority. They want to add goals to this team because they really struggled, not just in the Premier League, but across all competitions last year to score. Rasmus Højlund obviously has struggled. I think he scored 14 Premier League goals in the 2 seasons that he's been at the club. So clearly not the standard that Manchester United are looking for, but is this a bit of a risk as well? It's a lot of money, the fees there on the back of the Sun, 70.5 million for also another young player who's not proven in the Premier League. They'll be hoping they'll be getting a better hit rate if they do sign him than they've had with Rasmus Højlund, but it is another one that could be a big risk. But yeah, Manchester United definitely need a new number 9. I think they're going to hope that they can get over the line with the negotiations with Leipzig in the coming days, because obviously there's no problem with agreeing with the player. He's made it clear that he would prefer a move to Old Trafford over Newcastle, which is obviously another blow to Eddie Howe's side as well.
You mentioned the word blow there. That's the headline on the back of Jack's paper, The Sun, referring to Sesko opting for Man United over Newcastle. And it's interesting, isn't it, Jack? Perhaps not the most prolific of strikers in the Bundesliga, but only 22 years of age, more than 250 appearances for club and country. He's got an impressive CV given his age, hasn't he?
He has, and a lot of clubs, have been looking at him this summer. Arsenal did an awful lot of work on him. Newcastle obviously keen. He's obviously someone that's well liked by people that know what they're talking about when it comes to analysing these players, whether they've got an incredible goal record. You know, someone like Haaland, it's easy to go and pick, but the people that really look into this detail have obviously identified something in Sesko. Like Charlotte said, it is a gamble, it's a big fee, and he will know, having watched Manchester United for the last couple of years, that it's not an easy ride going in there. The pressure that was on Xerxes, Højlund as young strikers going in, if they don't get off to a flying start, then it becomes a really difficult place to rebuild yourself and get going again and find your feet if you don't make a running start at Old Trafford. It's a big year though for a trio of players they brought in. It's a lot of money they've invested in overhauling that forward line to move away from Garnacho, Xerxes, Højlund, to bring 78.5 on Sesko, 70 odd million on Brian Mbeumo, 62.5 I think it was on Matheus Cunha. And there's no guarantees around any of them. Cunha and Mbeumo have been good players in the Premier League, but never threatening that top half really in terms of places with their respective clubs. So they've got to go up another level and prove themselves. And then, as we've said, Sesko coming in with no Premier League track record. It's an awful lot of money to spend on nothing that's guaranteed. Obviously, you could never surefire say that something's going to work, but the pressure of Manchester United and the pressure of those fees, it's going to be an interesting start to the season for all 3 of them.
And this story features on the back of the Times as well. Sesko choosing United. Charlotte, it's interesting to look at some of the comparisons you might read about between Sesko and Erling Haaland, their respective records coming from the Bundesliga to the Premier League. For Haaland, it was 86 goals in 89 games at Dortmund, and for Sesko, 39 goals in 87 games for Leipzig. So far less prolific. Should we read anything into those records?
I mean, I think if you tried to compare any striker, mainly in history, to Erling Haaland's record, they're going to struggle to come up against the phenomenal numbers that he gets. So I think comparing anyone against Haaland's probably an unfair benchmark. In that story that my colleagues have written today, though, there is a graph and it does show that he even falls behind. I think it's shots per goal and goals per game. He falls behind the likes of Watkins, Chris Wood. This is if we're looking at Premier League strikers, Salah, Haaland, Wissa. So all Isak, like we mentioned before. So players who we know are proven Premier League goal scorers. If you compare his stats, he is falling slightly behind them as well, which to me would be more of a concern than directly comparing him to Haaland, who's a goal machine like we've not seen for a very long time. So yeah, I think that's an unfair benchmark to set him against, but he isn't coming in as a prolific, like you say, 50, 60, 70 goal player who you think is going to hit the ground running. It's going to take a lot of work. And like Jack said, there is so much pressure on these players at Manchester United to do that. Cunha and Mbeumo looked quite sharp on Manchester United's pre-season tour, but the team did still look lacking in that number 9 position. So whoever comes in to play up front, there is pressure on them. But also I think there's still pressure as well to maybe bring in a number 6, because Manchester United are really lacking in that area of the pitch as well. So I don't necessarily think that this will be the missing piece of the jigsaw for Ruben Amorim if he was to bring in a number 9, whether that is Sesko, which obviously they hope it's going to be. So it's going to be interesting to see what United decide to do in the last few weeks of the window.
An interesting time in the window. Charlotte, Jack, thanks very much for now. We will talk about Jack Grealish's future next. When we return, we will look at more of the sports stories in the morning's papers, including this in the Telegraph that calls new Arsenal striker Victor Gyökeres a goal pig. We'll explore what that means next